Alrighty, let's get started. It's, I guess, 10:02 on the West Coast, 1:02 our time here in Toronto. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Welcome to Fireside Chat today. Thank you for joining us. I think we have a really fantastic topic lined up today as we'll be discussing cybersecurity. If you haven't been to a Fireside Chat before, this is a conversation and it is a discussion. We have some panelists here today who are going to be able to give you some insights and their perspective from the field. And we also have some time dedicated to answer some of the questions from you and to dive into some topics that are relevant to your organization. Today, we are joined by Jason Jones, who will be our moderator. You might recognize him as one of our Foresight Executive in Residence. We also have a panel today. We have Calvin Engen from F12. We also have Erik Berg from KPMG joining us. So they're going to dive into, like I said, the topic of cybersecurity. They're going to talk about how it's relevant to your business. How does it relate to your clients, your partners, your investors. And we'll also talk about and discuss the more technical side is what risks are out there, how do you mitigate them, and what do you do if you are a victim to one of these attacks? So that's what we'll cover today. As I mentioned, this is a discussion. So please put your questions in the Q&A box. You'll be able to find it along the little menu bar there at the bottom. It is a little bit different from the chat box, so make sure you're clicking into the Q&A. And that way we'll be able to answer them. We do have a chunk of time towards the end that we will be going over, going through those questions and hopefully get to all of them, time pending, of course. Yeah, so that's it for me. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jason to give a bit of an intro, and we'll roll from there.
Hi guys, it's really excited here. Security is a big topic that I hear a lot with a lot of my clients, and including some of the actual founders and entrepreneurs and everything that I help when we're mentoring through Foresight and all that. Myself, I own a software company myself called Vertical Motion. I've been in EIR probably for around 2 years now, where I've held several different roles as an actual mentor in Foresight, helping companies as a CTO role, facilitating the delivery program that they have there. And I'm pretty excited on this topic. We're going to hear more what's going on here. So I'll introduce Calvin here and hand it over to Calvin so he could introduce himself and see how things go.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Calvin Engen. I'm the CTO for F12. I'm very passionate about this topic. I love cybersecurity. There's a lot of information to go through. We're going to keep it high level though. A little bit about myself. I'm 15 years with F12, passionate about IT, everything technology. And really my day-to-day job is to keep our customers safe and secure. And so, we do that through a number of different avenues by, educating them through awareness programs, making sure that we're protecting them through different programs, different technologies, and educating. And so, through a lot of the things that we're doing here is about creating a safer economy around cyber attack. And I think this is really important because especially when we talk about startups is, there's a lot of risk and, inherently just starting a business, but then to have all the, tertiary impact of people trying to attack you and slip you up. So I'm really excited about this topic today and look forward to the conversation.
And KPMG, we have both Erik and Roddy here as well. So I'll just turn that over to you guys.
Perfect. Roddy, you want to kick things off?
Excellent. Yeah. You just want me to give an introduction, Erik?
Yeah, sounds good.
Fantastic. So hi, everyone. I'm Roddy Govender. I'm a senior manager here at KPMG Vancouver. I really have a long experience with KPMG. Started out in South Africa about 11 years ago, and I've done a little bit of traveling between South Africa and Canada, winding up in Europe for a little while as well. I really focus on our red teaming side and our incident response. I deal a lot with our penetration testing, our ethical hacking, our digital forensics and investigations. And I really get into some of the the nitty gritty when it comes to helping our clients recover from very extreme situations.
Mhm. Great. So Roddy gets paid to break things and break into systems. So it's a pretty good job that he has. Thanks everyone for attending. My name's Erik Berg. I'm responsible for our digital risk and cybersecurity practice here in BC. I've been with KPMG for a long time. My area of focus is across the entire spectrum of cybersecurity. So everything from preparation, preparedness through to detection and monitoring, and through to incident response and recovery. So it's the full life cycle. Prior to KPMG, I was in IT operations, so hands-on keyboards, networking, IT operations, service delivery, a little bit of system development and coding. Knew enough to be dangerous, and knew enough that it was a good experience, and we do a lot of AppSec development and security consulting around application development, which is a big focus, and also cloud security right now. So I'll pass back to Jason to kick things off.
Great, guys. It's great to meet you both. You know, over the 30 years that I've been in the software industry, you know, cybersecurity has evolved and changed a lot since the 90s. You know, a lot more vulnerabilities, different things, and it's not your classic hacker scenario that you see in the movies where people are just, you know, doing fancy things on computers. It's actually a lot more of a social networking based environment where people are fishing for information, trying to get access, and through these vulnerabilities that they uncover private information that they're able to gain access or easier access to your systems by just, you know, coming across an email with some information and then trying to coerce some information out of another individual to expose these actual vulnerabilities. So I think my first question really is to Calvin. You know, what are some of the first steps that a startup should take when it comes to protecting themselves? Really, what do you would think off the top of your head?
Yeah, you know, I think the first step, you know, ultimately, you know, you've created a business and you're proficient in that industry, and so you're not going to have the you know, the foresight to know all the ins and outs of cybersecurity. So the first step is really to find a trusted certified IT partner, you know, or a consultant to help you with mapping out that journey. But, you know, from my perspective, you really got to get your basics covered. And there's really 4 absolute must-haves, in my opinion, that you must have as a business. The first one is just to make sure that you have backups. As simple as that is, it is often something that is overlooked, to make sure that you actually have something working. And that they're disconnected. They're not something that could get ransomed as well. So making sure they're disconnected, or a cloud copy somewhere else. Making sure you have all your systems patched on a regular cadence. You know, a lot of what we're talking about is this ability to break into systems because you have vulnerabilities that haven't been patched, and that's just poor IT hygiene. And then your users, making sure all your users that have access to your systems, or all points of access into your system, have something called multi-factor authentication. So something you know and something you have. And that's everything from email to VPNs and everything in between. And then lastly is have a security awareness program in place to train and test your employees. This is an important aspect because you mentioned social engineering. This is one of the primary aspects of how people get into an organization, is they're making others click. And so making sure that your people can actually identify when it's a malicious email so that they do not click. And so making sure that that's part of that method to protect themselves. There's a couple other things I just want to touch on though. Ransomware makes all the headlines, right? But there's something fundamental that needs to be addressed, and that's around financial fraud. And I think, you know, a startup is really sensitive to you know, having capital leave an organization, you know, especially when maybe things are tight. And so making sure that you have some process controls in place to for any kind of financial changes or requests. So this is really around segregation of duties. So ensuring that you have a secondary verification method. And so, you know, there's a great example of this. We have I guess a partner that we heard the story from, but basically they have a CEO and a CTO, or sorry, CFO, and they're working in different buildings. And so that CFO received an email from the CEO saying, hey, can you wire $120,000 to this account? This was not abnormal. And CFO processed the transaction, replied back, hey, no problem. A few days later, he passed the, there's a meeting with the CEO. He said, hey, just want to make sure you get that transaction that I sent you for $120,000. And CEO looked at him stunned and said, what are you talking about? And he just like the blood rushing out of that CFO's face in that moment, realizing what happened. And unfortunately, they were not able to get that money back. So, $120,000 just walking out the door just like that. And all it was is it looked like it came from the CEO, but there was a letter change in the domain name. So it was like an I instead of an L, and that was it. That was all it took. And it was, the money walked away. So it's that easy. And so it's so important that you have the controls in place to protect yourself against these types of attacks.
Yeah, and that's a good point. There's you get ransomware. That's what's making a lot of the headlines, and there's so many other risks that are out there. And you brought up some of the actual financial risks. Eric, you guys tend to be more on the front lines with Roddy and all that. What else are you seeing are some of the other major types of risks that are out there that people may overlook or not be aware of?
Yeah, just to start off with, ransomware is getting all the headlines. But we're seeing, one of the things in place where we start off with is the motivation. So kind of who is doing this and what are they after? So to kind of unpack, how does it apply to your organization? You got to ask yourself, what are your crown jewels? What would someone want access to for various different reasons? And I'll just name a couple of the threat actors and what their motivations are, and you can almost reverse engineer what they would potentially want to get access to within your organization. So we all know about cyber criminals. They're running the ransomware, and the cyber criminals are so sophisticated that it is really a business for them. You have cyber criminal organizations that are specialized in gaining a footprint and access into a system. You have cyber criminal organizations that specialize in exfiltrating data. So once they have access, exfiltrating data out of your networks. You have organizations that specialize in selling the information on the dark web. You have organizations that specialize in negotiations. So you can kind of see that, and they all work together. So it's a very sophisticated group of individuals, and obviously their motivation is profit. Anything that they can do to make a profit, that's their motivation. Nation states, geopolitical, many times after IP. We've seen nation states compromise organizations because they were involved in merger acquisition, and they compromise the organization's third-party legal service provider as a gateway into their systems. You have hacktivists that for ideological reasons, and insider threats. Let's not forget about insider threats. Disgruntled, discontented employees, potentially walking out with IP, going across the street to a competitor, and or just causing nuisance within your organization. So all of the threat actors that I just went through have different motivations, and they're after different pieces of information. So the first thing that we always talk about is, go through what are your crown jewels within your organization. There's always, personally identifiable information, PII, healthcare information, employee payroll information, financial information, strategic information, IP. So it will be a little bit different depending on your business and depending on your operating model. But that's where we would start, because you don't have a finite number of dollars to provide cybersecurity services or controls on, and you want to make sure that you spend those dollars and resources on things that really matter and that you want to protect. Roddy, want to shed some additional light on that?
Sure. Just another couple of things from my side, from what we're seeing in the market today, in the landscape today, is that some of these attacks are getting extremely more sophisticated. But Jason, like you said, it's not always someone hands on keyboards that's attacking the perimeter, and lots of fancy lights are going off in the distance, and that's how they get in. The attacks are getting far more sophisticated in terms of they might not always be coming over an external infrastructure. Sometimes it's a very advanced phishing campaigns. Sometimes it's the supply chain. And that's something we've been seeing a lot of recently, where you have vendors and software products and supply chain into your organization that has been compromised from somewhere else in the world. And you have provided that software product unlimited access to your environment. And we are finding that ripple effect with regards to supply chain and the vulnerabilities that are coming with it, incredibly hard for people to detect and remediate. And I think that brings us to something else in terms of, for startups, what's something to take into particular account. And there's something that Facebook said that kind of always stuck with me in terms of when they were starting up. They had this on a whiteboard behind them saying, "Move fast and break things." And that was kind of their philosophy around building Facebook. And I think that's great from a startup perspective. But I think if you don't embed security around your valuable data from the get-go, that's incredibly dangerous, because it's really hard to do it when you're 1,000 days old or you're 10 years old if you weren't there from the beginning, embedding that into your structure.
And that's another good point as well. You make sure that whatever you do, you carry it through the growth of your actual company, and make sure that it matures with the actual company as well. I'd like to touch back on some of the things that you mentioned, though, specifically around partners and as well supply chain. A lot of people sit there and think, okay, yeah, when it comes to security, I got to focus on my own company, without realizing that their exposures may not be specifically within the company itself, but with the partners that they may have, or the deals or the other organizations that are commonly interacting with their actual businesses and their employees. Calvin, what do you say about that? I know that you've come to, in some situations where you've helped some of your actual companies go through some of this and do proper audits around their partners. What were some of your recommendations around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is part of the education gap that we have in the industry. There's no set of standards that are mandatory across small businesses or medium businesses. It is a bit of a grab bag. Now, each industry has regulation. So if you're, credit cards, you have PCI compliance, and depending on volume, you have different levels that you have to obtain. If you're, working with healthcare information, you got PIPEDA or HIPAA in the US. If you're doing defense contractors, you have CMMC. But the challenge is that, those are very specific. So if you're not in any of those industries, now what do you turn to? And so some of them will be, where the federal government has, recently brought to market Cybersecure Canada. It's really designed around small to medium businesses to have some base level controls that a business can obtain so that they're protected. And the intent there is that everyone in the supply chain, every one of your partners would have this. So at least then there's kind of a badge of knowing that you have these controls in place. It's at its infancy though. F12 was actually one of the first in Canada to obtain this certification as a service provider. Now, one that is often thrown around that you may or may not know is SOC 2 Type 2 certification. And this one's really good because it's third-party audited, meaning that another party comes in, validates the control. So what does that mean? Well, there's 5 different controls that they're looking for. There's security, availability, confidentiality, privacy, and process integrity. And so there's a number, a collection of controls. It's expensive to obtain, and it's hard to get and maintain every year. I know we are part of that ecosystem. We're SOC 2 Type 2 certified. But often what people will say is, well, yeah, my data is in a SOC 2 Type 2 data center. It's with Amazon or Azure or another third party. But that certification only actually then impacts the 4 walls of that data center. Where it actually is meaningful is the person that's interacting with your data, right? And so what that means is if you have a third-party software provider, making sure that provider, not the data center that they're in, is SOC 2 Type 2 certified. We recently internally actually went through an exercise to move to a HRIS system. And as part of our security review with whatever vendor that we're selecting, we go through and make sure that the vendor has the appropriate security controls in place, privacy controls in place, to make sure that they're taking security very seriously. And they were first to come to the table, like we're SOC 2 Type 2 certified, and so that made it up a number of our approvals, to a point where unfortunately then we got to, okay, let's see your SOC 2 Type 2 report, and they sent us the report from the data center. I said, no, that's not what we're looking for. We're actually wanting to make sure that you have the personal identifiable information of our employees, and so where is that from your perspective? And they didn't have it. And now, the partner that brought them to the table thought they had it because they had it from the data center. And so that created a whole different issue, because they were saying, no, this is a SOC 2 Type 2 certified entity, and they were not. And so they had to rapidly go out and get certified. And thankfully they were able to do that, but that's the gap, because often it's just a compliance checkbox. Yeah, they are, we're good, but making sure that you're digging deeper. So when I look at bringing on a new vendor, whoever that might be, is I'm asking those questions. Do you have security controls? Do you have privacy controls in place? Let me see them. Are you doing the rigor that you need to be doing on an annual basis around penetration testing or vulnerability scanning to ensure that your business is taking a security mindset? That was kind of what Roddy was saying, right? Is making sure that we're taking this very seriously from the start. And we're seeing more partners starting to do that, but there's a lot of gaps out there still.
And that's true, because this not only will have an effect on your own partners, but also has an effect on your clients that you go after as well, where they'll turn around and say, do you have these compliances? Are you covered in these ways with security? Especially if you're planning on providing a service to all of their employees, where their employees are putting information on your system. Which also comes into play when it comes to regulatory and compliance scenarios, when it comes to governing bodies or working with the government. I know, Eric, one of the things you wanted to cover as well was the implications around regulatory and compliance when it comes to security as well. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so Calvin went through a couple of the different regulations and frameworks that are kind of industry specific. I feel that regulatory and compliance, they're catching up. Cybersecurity criminals are always typically always ahead. Regulation is catching up, but we are starting to see some good regulation and legislation. I just point to GDPR, privacy legislation out of Europe. And what I like about that, I mean, we can get in a full debate as far as is it too much, is it not enough? But what I like about that is the punitive damages. If you are caught being offside and not complying, it really hits the bottom line of organizations. We are seeing large organizations being fined that don't comply with GDPR, which is good. I just want to touch upon kind of the third party risk assessments that we were talking about. And I think it goes both ways. Not only when you do a risk assessment on the organizations that you choose to partner with, it typically is a broad risk assessment, financial viability, how long have they been in business, code of conduct, all that type of stuff. And as you dig deeper into the security aspects, it's really essentially, their ability to, continue to provide services, and are they going to keep your information safe? So, and when I say it goes two ways, we are being asked by organizations that we work with, that we provide services to, what's your business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan? What's your security controls in place, privacy policy, all that type of stuff. So it is just becoming more of an expectation. And I think it's just becoming more of an expectation because everyone's expectation is increasing. Everyone's personal standards are increasing as it relates to how organizations and how people protect your data. So that's just kind of carrying over into the business world, which I think is a positive thing.
Good stuff. So obviously, we want to get to the meat of the subject. You're a startup, you suddenly realize, wait a minute, I have somebody that's gotten into my system, or an employee's walked away with my data. We're in trouble here. Something's happened. What are the next steps? What should be the next steps that a company should be doing really here? Erik, what do you think would be the best steps from that point on?
I'll take you through a typical story.
Okay.
So it typically happens on a Friday night, Saturday morning, when everyone is gone for the weekend.
Too true.
This has happened to us multiple times where at a soccer field watching my kids play soccer, and I get the call. And it's a call from an executive saying, Erik, our systems are locked out. We can't do anything. What do I do? So if they have an incident response plan in place, activate your cyber incident response plan. If they don't, I talk through all the people that they need to get into a room. You fire up that war room. And typically, scenario is you're on a call half an hour later with incident response specialists, including forensic specialists, and various different people that can help you identify what has happened. Because one of the first things is to figure out the fact pattern of the situation. What has happened? Where are they? And nature of the events and the timing. And so once you start that fired up, hopefully you have access to specialty resources, because your typical network administrator doesn't necessarily have, and most of the time does not have, the forensic skills to threat hunt and identify where they are at and what they are doing. And so that just gets a little bit of a side tangent. Is cybersecurity is people, process, technology. It's not just technology and tools that will keep you safe. But one of the things that I feel has really, I talked about, everyone expectations increasing, the expectations around what types of tools you have in place to keep you safe and detect and monitor and respond has drastically increased over I would say just even over the last 2 years. So something like endpoint detection, I feel is a critical tool and a critical capability for organizations to have in order to respond to incidences. So one, have an incident response plan in place. Try and go through scenarios before they actually happen to you. You do not want to be in the war room saying, should we pay or shouldn't we pay? Go through the different scenarios, and that's a decision that management needs to make. There's various different opinions around it. All I can say is the majority of our last 10, 15 incident responses that we've been involved with, there has been a payout. And the rationale around that is not only and this is related to ransomware, not only are they just encrypting the information, so that's one aspect. And, to Calvin's comment, if you had your backups, recovering from that is, it's time consuming, but it's a relatively easy process to do in most parts. You might be down for a couple of days or a week, but more so, they're also getting a copy of your data, which has changed the paradigm of how you respond to ransomware. So before it was just like, okay, we got a copy, we got our backups, let's get our systems up and running, we can survive. But how do you deal now with criminal organizations that actually have the information and threatening to release it on the dark web? So that I feel is the reason why, I used to say, payouts were kind of 50-50. Now I feel it's kind of increasing now a little bit. And then also another point around controls related to kind of incident responses. yeah, phishing and targeting the people are all there. In the last 10 IR engagements, the vast majority of how they got breached were unpatched systems. So that has kind of shifted for us in the last 6 months, where, you know, previously that was kind of, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like patching. Now it's kind of come back to the forefront, especially with, you know, a lot of zero-day vulnerabilities, and you just got to stay on top of patching the systems, because they're back there looking for that easy gap in your infrastructure. Roddy, want to add a couple of items?
I would actually, and I think you've done a very good overall walkthrough in terms of what happens after something goes wrong. Jason, to your question. But I think what's also worth noting is the prepare phase before something goes wrong, and how critical that is. And I think there's a couple of steps that's worth taking note of that you can't overlook. And that is, you know, one of the things is that we're talking about our data has walked out the door, some employee has gotten access to data, or it's been locked up. I think recognizing the value of data itself, what data do we have? Why is it valuable to us? Why could it be valuable to someone else? What are we actually trying to protect? That'll inform what level of controls you want to put in place. It might not be NSA military grade level of protection everywhere on your network, but maybe there are certain things that you need to protect. In the other aspect, the thing that happens most often than not is that once we get into an investigation, we find out that there isn't enough data for us to look through to actually help and solve the problem. So what goes into that prepare phase as well is, what do I need to enable? What do I need to do from a logging perspective? What do I need to enable from a monitoring perspective? What data do I need to collect? So once this actually goes in for investigation, we can actually sort through it and solve the problem. More often than not, we'll get into an environment and we'll see some logs, and we'll see that something was executed. We'll get into some really crafty malware, but then we'll see Office 365 isn't auditing anything. A lot of things on the network are not flagging anything. And there's only so much, there's only so far you can go with that. So one of the key takeaways for me is making sure that you're collecting enough information for after the fact.
And I found that, yeah, the preventative stuff is very important to keep in mind as well, because people tend to sit there and disable it after a while because it gets in their way, or it's disrupting the overall office flow. And I'll just take down these sockets on my firewall and just disable this feature. Or I won't bother scanning the emails when they come in and block them off for potential threats of phishing, because I'm tired of seeing that banner up here in my emails whenever I receive correspondences from people. So it's a lot of the times I agree. A lot of the times it's fairly preventative. We could prevent these actual situations from occurring by monitoring things appropriately and being made aware of them when they first start to appear. And then being able to put into action the proper policies that deal with them once you start getting more and more alerts that these issues are starting to appear in your network, and you're starting to be more and more encountering these items. One thing I would also stress is one I agree with you is the patching. A lot of the times when I've been brought in on some security breaches and issues as well was directly related to the patching not being done or maintained. And then, when you find out that they haven't done backups for quite a while as well. So you're like, okay, well, when was the last time you did a backup? Oh, it's been a month. You're like, oh, well, okay. Right. Okay.
And then when's the last time you actually tested it, right? Is the other aspect is, having a backup is one thing, but having a disaster recovery plan, because, Roddy mentioned, you can restore. And Erik was mentioning, if you can restore, it maybe takes a day, but maybe you can't be without that data for a day. So what is that recovery point objective that you need to achieve? And then build a solution towards that. And so that really comes through on a data management plan. So making sure that you can, one, identify your crown jewels, know how long you can be without that data, what levels of security protections need to be in place. Maybe that's encryption or limited access to those individuals. And then you can start to craft, the solution around that aspect. So maybe they get into the system, but maybe you have enough protections in place where the critical crown jewels are actually protected, because you've thought that through ahead of time. But the pre-planning is so vital.
One thing that to also be aware of is the fact that these patches are occurring and they're being announced is also a vulnerability. And it's a double-edged sword that people don't really realize, is that a lot of these people that are doing these types of infiltrations are monitoring for these actual weaknesses to be announced and appeared. A lot of the times within 24 hours, they've automatically created some form of automated script to hit a whole bunch of sites that have this potential vulnerability, associated specifically to the patch that hasn't been applied to a firewall, to a website, to a network. And suddenly they're not only hitting one site or one potential threat or one potential vulnerability, they're hitting hundreds of sites and hundreds of people all within a span of 24 hours. And I agree, yeah, Eric, it's usually on the weekends, on a Friday or a long weekend, you know, when they know for a fact that nobody's there and they're just going to spend the whole long weekend hitting all these vulnerabilities.
And I just want to add on, that's not the time when they've broken into your system. They typically will have been in your system at least a month beforehand. Just, you know, doing discovery exercises, who's who in the zoo, where's the information, how can we move laterally within your system? And they plan it out and orchestrate it out. You know, there's various different stats out there around, on average, cyber criminals and have been in networks that they've compromised up to, I think, 220 days. It kind of fluctuates between 150 days all the way up to plus 300 days. And unfortunately, many times the organizations are notified through third parties where they've seen something and they tip them off. And you know, this is not CSI. You know, those threat actors that I talked through at the beginning, we see all of those in our local Vancouver market. It's not a big massive anomaly. So it is happening.
And just maybe to illustrate that, just to put that in perspective, that's like a person that's walked into your house, they're eating all your food, doing all that kind of stuff. And you know, the realization in that moment that they've been in your house for that long, that one moment where now you're like, okay, somebody's in my house. What have they done for this amount of time? And then, you know, the payload drops, whether that's ransom, whether that's they've already exfiltrated a bunch of your data. But here's the scary part. It's now that they're in, you're aware, it on average takes another 60 days for you to get them out of your house. Just think about that. So not only do you know, but now you're still conducting or trying to conduct business for another 2 months before you can actually get them fully out of your house. So this is the challenge. And we talked about all the aspects of not having the appropriate logs, not having maybe the ability to recover quickly. All of these are the aspects that lead to this. And so if you put in the plan up front, you looked at the data, you've ensured that you have people that are watching on the Friday night or well ahead 3 months ago, so that you know that, hey, there is triggers in the environment that can inform you that there's something malicious happening. Because they leave fingerprints on all the things that they're touching. And for security professionals that are trained to identify those aspects, they can stop the attack before they get too deep and they haven't been paying rent for 6 months in your house. So this is the aspect, is taking this very seriously, putting those things in place. And this is where you absolutely need to work with you know, a security professional like KPMG, like F12, to expose these aspects and to start to identify the areas of weakness and risk in your organization. And this is so very important, because when you're attacked, it's too late. Now you're scrambling. Now you're trying to, you know, start an incident response plan or enact your incident response plan, and that's often too late.
So it's true that now you have this person that's been in your system for a good, you know, 60 days or 90 days or however long they've been in your system, and you're finding crumbs on your dining room table and in your kitchen, and they've got slices of bread that are missing. Now the actual risk is that it's also now spread to your partners and anybody else that's been interacting with your actual business as well at that time. What are the responsibilities for an actual business that's found themselves in this kind of scenario? how does this affect their actual clients and their investors and their partners and anybody else that they've done business with? Any thoughts around that, Kevin? Or
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's ripples that occur here, right? And so those ripples have lasting impact. And it's not just about in that moment is now suddenly you're maybe unable to provide services to your clients. You have a duty to inform the people that are involved, especially if you have personal identifiable information. It's a mandate by the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and there is fines if you don't do that in a timely fashion. So ensuring that you're meeting those obligations. But then think, if you have investors, you have obligations to your investors, and that could lead to potentially not being able to attract new investors. So, this is why it's so very important then to inform your clients, your partners in a timely fashion. And, I think Erik did a good job of kind of illustrating a little bit of what those steps are. But when you've identified kind of who your stakeholders are of your system, make sure you do that ahead of time, because often you cannot do it after the fact because your CRM will probably be locked down. So making sure you have another secondary copy of those contact lists that you're updating on a regular basis. And then really identify your audience that you're going to talk to. There's the internal audience of your staff, and then there's the external audience. And so making sure that you're informing them before the public, just so that they're prepped ahead of time. And then making sure that you're tailoring a message to them that is a balance between being transparent, but sharing too much. And so what I mean by that is you want to be very prescriptive with what you're actually informing your customers on. And so this is why establishing the facts in that war room to understand, how wide is the breach? And you may only have a little bit of information at that time, and that's okay. Don't think you have to understand the whole scope of it. You need to inform on what you know is true, and over time that could expand. Listen, the reality is that we hear breaches where it's 2 million records, and by the end of the attack or the breach, it's found out it's actually 16 million records. And that's often the case with a lot of these attacks, because in that moment of time you only have a certain amount of information. And then as you go through, is making sure you're crafting that message in a way that you're able to hopefully still retain some element of trust, right? Is you're engaging professionals to work through this attack, right? And there is a level, it's like we're in this together, because a lot of businesses have gone through this, and the big ones hit the news, right? The news cycle. But we're talking, I think there was just a survey I was reading the other day. IDC Canada did a survey. 460 firms in the last 12 months had 67% of them had a ransomware attack in the last 12 months.
I would just echo the communication aspects that Calvin talked about. It's not uncommon. I actually recommend it to do that communication based on different scenarios, because I've seen public announcements where I read it and I'm like, that company made it up in the war room on the spot, and they weren't thinking properly. You don't think properly when your business has stopped, and you want to do that and craft those messages in advance. And Calvin was bang on, like, be transparent, trustworthy. Don't say too much, but don't say things like we've locked down our systems and we're 100% secure, and those statements that you cannot take back, because you never will know 100% that so you don't want to make statements like that. My final point is, if you're familiar with enterprise risk management, it's all about taking a look at the likelihood and the impact. And incident response is all about mitigating the impact of a cyber breach. So, when you are prepared, when everybody has their kind of role in how to respond to the incident, you typically respond quicker, resolve it faster, and you mitigate the trust. You maintain trust with your organization, with your stakeholders and partners, if you are prepared. If you're not, it's just a recipe to degrade trust with all your stakeholders and partners.
A takeaway from me that I think is quite important from the trust angle as well, that really degrades this, could be, when we see someone issue a communication out to their customers and they say that they've experienced a breach, but they haven't dedicated the time and the due diligence to investigate what actually happened. That communication might say, you may or may not have been affected by our breach, which is unconfirmed to affect these amount of systems at this time. That loses a lot more trust with customers when they don't know exactly what happened within your systems. And I think if they get the sense that you're not putting in the time and the effort to figure it out and figure out what that impact was to your own data, to their data, to other customers, that loses a lot more trust than if you just got breached. They would want to know that you've understood the problem and that you're reacting appropriately to it.
And I would just add to that, it's important that then what are you doing about it as an organization? So, if you have leaked out information and it's, PII information, then what are you going to do? Are you going to offer credit monitoring to those clients? Are you going to have maybe, identity fraud protection on those clients? And those are some basic things that you can implement to ensure that increases the level of trust, because you're taking that very seriously. You want to protect those individuals, and I know clients respect that. I would almost venture to say most people probably has free credit monitoring because almost every organization seems to have had some kind of breach. It's free now, basically, and that's not a great place to be in, but certainly goes a long way to building trust.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to risk mitigation overall, it's taking a view of, okay, it's going to happen. So let's plan for it ahead of time, make sure we have some procedures in place and that we're really on the ball when it does come out. And so we're prepared to deal with it. And we make sure we have the tools in place to manage that. Now, what was interesting is the whole war room aspect that you mentioned earlier, Eric, and also what Calvin hinted to is that this person may still be in your actual systems at that time. What type of scenarios or situations have you guys helped out with resolving an issue like that, where somebody's in the system, you're trying to resolve the actual issue? What type of tools or means or policies have you put in place to help mitigate those types of scenarios? You're trying to evict somebody that's in your house, but at the same time, you're trying to deal with everything at the same time. So
yeah, I'll just talk through a couple of, geo fencing from an IP addressing. Typically there's no need for someone from Nigeria to be dialing into your Office 365 environment, typically. So that's a starting point. Endpoint detection and response capability. So Sentinel, Carbon Black, there's a bunch of different tools out there, expensive ones and more affordable ones. You have to have that capability to see what's happening in your network. Email compromise is happening all the time, where a compromised email account. And so when we talk about that war room, there's been times when we've gone off of the corporate email system, if it's not a ransomware and the system was available to us, just because we couldn't rely upon the communication going through that email channel. We actually just went offline and found an alternate way to communicate amongst the war room participants, just in case people were eavesdropping on the plans and looking through emails and stuff like that. There's firewall rule sets, a lot of stuff that you can do around monitoring of firewalls, but really it's the ability to have eyes on your network, eyes on the endpoint, and ability to kind of troubleshoot when they came in, finding patient zero, and then going from there. And We haven't even talked about the recovery aspect around kind of developing a framework around, you know, how you have a red zone, yellow zone, green zone to, you know, clean systems and bring them back online in a safe way, because that's another way that organizations get messed up or have difficulty recovering because they don't have a proper framework in place to recover dirty systems into clean systems. So, Roddy?
And yeah, just maybe to add to Erik's point is, you know, he's talking about red zone, green zone, yellow zone. You know, you're thinking if they've been in the system for 4 to 5 months, simply recovering to last week's backup and then spinning it back up into the environment is often can just get re-encrypted or re-attacked. So this is why it's very important, because there'll be those fingerprints on those systems, and you may have to go back much farther in order to ensure that that system is actually is clean. So.
Yep, absolutely. And I think from us, one of the key lessons is working through that risk-based recovery process. So when you get initially either ransomware or there's a breach, you put everything into that red zone and we don't trust it. It doesn't communicate to anything. It doesn't talk to anything. We know something is funny happening in there, something malicious, and we're going to treat it as if everything in there is hostile until we're proven otherwise. And we start to migrate things out one zone at a time, moving it into our engine. That's a super monitored zone. We know everything that's going on into there until eventually you can get your critical applications out. They're now connecting to the internet. They're connecting to your corporate network. You know you trust them. And that once you have business operations done, you can then concentrate on the non-critical systems, things that you can bring back online that doesn't have that RPO, that RTO that affects business operations. I think one of the key things that affects this as well as getting into a safe state later on, is learning lessons during that recovery process and that initial compromise process, gaining threat intelligence, gaining actual artifact intelligence, and learning certain lessons so you can integrate that into your threat hunting and your recovery process moving out of it, as well as you can upgrade your detection tools, your monitoring tools, and your prevention tools with this threat intelligence you've learned coming out of this experience, so that you don't get reinfected or re-affected by the same thing again a month or 2 months later down the line.
Right, and it's not just necessarily about upgrading the tools. It's about, you know, reconfiguring the tools, such as, you know, sometimes, you know, having lessons learned. Man, I wish I had logs going back 90 days rather than 30 days. You know, it's a simple tweak like that will really help you out.
Awesome. So we ran into some technical difficulties, so it cut us a bit short on time. I know we wanted to have a bit of a Q&A section for you guys, so some of the people in the audience would be able to ask us, some of the attendees ask us some questions. Would you guys be open to them sending us some questions and then us forwarding over to you so they could get some responses to those? Obviously.
Yeah, for
Certainly.
sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure.
Great, fantastic. So that kind of concludes things on our end. We're coming close to a bit of a time there, Tyler. We're good. Anything else that you want to?
Yeah, I just think it might be a good opportunity to wrap things up here. I want to say thank you to everyone, Calvin, Roddy, and Erik, and Jason, of course. Thank you for being here. I think this was a really valuable conversation and really informative for all the ventures here today. And thank you to everyone who stuck around and kind of got through these technical difficulties with us. We appreciate you being here. What is the best way to contact you guys? Can we forward emails and that sort of thing, and so that if we have any additional questions that they can reach out to you directly and kind of go from there?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Other than that, everyone, all the attendees, please take the opportunity now to fill out the feedback form. It really helps us to, you know, build these out and kind of address the topics that you're interested in. Additionally, I did want to mention the upcoming, we have the Climate Connection event coming up on November 24th, which is AgriNext, and our BioNext, which is coming up on December 6th. Additionally, watch for the next Fireside Chat. We will be covering the topic of non-dilutive funding, and that will be on December 14th. And with that, thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon and the rest of the day.